And there we go, starting for us internally that we know what we're up to. And yeah, as you can guess, we'll also be offering this recording as a download on our website. So welcome to our Meet Vertex webinar tonight. My name is Martin Kuhn, with me Jan Hüvel. Some of you we have already met, some of you we haven't met yet and look forward to meeting too in the future. What are we up to today? We are going to do a short webinar to show you Vertex, what it does, what it is, and what you can do with it. And yeah, would encourage you to pose questions at any time. In Zoom, you can find this little Q&A feature. Simply go ahead, type in any question you may have, and we will either answer it in a text form, or we will put it right into the webinar. So stop us or pose your questions at any time, and we'll gladly dive in and yeah, see that we can answer them for you. So, did I forget anything, Jan?
Well, maybe the only thing about the other webinars coming up this week.
Off you go.
Yeah, since we have I think on Wednesday we have another 2 webinars. In the morning it's in German, and in the evening it's in English again, same time as now. It will be the English one will be covering the composition part of Vertex, what you can do in terms of compositing and how you can interact with multiple playbacks. And this will be a more in-depth webinar. As of today, it's more a round trip showing everything Vertex at a glance, and most of the core features. And as Martin said, feel free to interrupt us anytime, shoot us some questions, and we'll be happy to answer them. That's what we're here for. Okay, then
I would say off we go. What is Vertex? What is behind that name, so to speak? Well, when we created Vertex, we looked at what media servers are today, and in many cases it's going to be a very big, very expensive box, hardware, software in one big combination. And we thought, what is the future of this kind of a system going to be? And what we came up with, we said we need to have what's called an AV production suite. So we are looking to put 3 core functionalities, which we always see in media processing, into one application, which is media playback, interaction, and control. So in media playback, Vertex, of course, plays back videos, audio files, pictures, and many different formats. We'll go into those in detail a bit later. But it doesn't only do that, it goes a lot further. It also goes into the world of interactivity. So you can connect sensors, you can work with different protocols, you can connect devices such as projectors or lights. You can even use those to composite something as well. So you can add lights to a video timeline to control lights as well. And at the end of the day, you can provide all of that in a simple end user style application, for example, on a tablet or as a web page even, where somebody can, for example, control an application, or during a show, somebody can see a time code or things like that. So that's what we have in an AV production suite. It's one software package to take care of most of the needs you will encounter in your everyday show production or fixed installation. We always get asked when we're talking about Vertex, and we have to remember only 3 things. What are the 3 core things you have to remember about Vertex? And those are quite straightforward. Vertex is a multi-system, multi-display, multi-user media processing system, meaning you can connect as many systems, computers, as you like. These computers can have as many outputs as you like. So you could have multiple GPUs if you want to, but you can also have a single HD output if you want to. And you can work on this project either alone or with as many operators as you like. So it's multi-system, multi-display, and multi-user. What are some things which maybe make Vertex special? What are the USPs, so to speak? So one thing which is pretty defining for the application is that we have put everything into one. We have put everything into one software, which yeah should be the all-in-one concept, so to speak. We have a system setup, which is what we call in a session, meaning you can connect as many computers as you like, but then you can actually work with them in one big cloud, so to speak. We'll show that a bit later in the demo. We are completely open to whichever protocol or programming language it may be. You can connect Vertex to systems like Crestron, like AMX. You can even remote control other products out there, and be it signage products if you want to. We support over 180 codecs, especially the most common ones we use most of the time: HapHapQ, ProRes, Notch LC, as well as a bunch of image formats ranging from Photoshop files to TIFFs to PDFs even, alongside a lot of streaming protocols, be it NDI5 with alpha channel in and out, SRT, Spout, all of the things you probably have heard of before. As already mentioned, Vertex from the core up is a multi-user software. So you can scale up not only your systems, but also the people working with your systems. We take care of show control, not only media playback, but also controlling the playback. And what is absolutely one of our core fundamental beliefs, Vertex is completely hardware independent. So there is one software installer, which you can find on iversal.com get trial, or if you're a user in your user account. And there's one software installer. It's going to be the same one. It doesn't matter if you have a one output system or a triple GPU system. It's all in one software installer, and you can use it on any Windows hardware. And what we are also aspiring to do is to pretty much break that boundary from having a localized media serverless system, which for a long time, it was always the policy never to connect it to the internet, never let it communicate with the outside world. We're pretty much breaking that paradigm and have optimized a lot to work remotely, for example, with Vertex, but also offer services which are cloud enabled, be it license management, which you can transfer licenses, or even virtual machine deployment. So
yeah, maybe we should mention something about the licensing in general. So
yes.
Initially, Vertex was offered as a all-in-one, as one suite solution. Throughout the pandemic, we focused a lot also on fixed installs, where since the suite solution was also aimed at production companies and rental companies who would decide from show to show, from event to event, what type of setup and what type of configuration they would choose it for. So that's why Vertex is so flexible. But for fixed installs, we found that there's more demand for having a dedicated amount of playout machines or playout channels versus having control systems or touch control surfaces. That's why we broke this up into sub licenses, so called. So we have the Vertex Suite that has all-in-one, and we have the Vertex Edit for editing, and the Vertex Play for 1, 2, 3, or any amount of outputs. Okay. I just heard a, thank you. So for any amount of outputs, and there's an additional Vertex Touch license, which enables only the touch control surfaces on a Windows tablet, for example. Besides the Windows Touch or the Vertex Touch license, there is also the web access, which we'll show later or explain later. So the control surfaces are for free available also via web browsers, but this will always be a subset of the functionality that we can offer in the application itself or from Vertex itself. So far, all these licenses can be found also on our website to compare them, but this is the general concept. So have either everything in one or playout versus editing separate, so that this can be configured freely. And we will give you an overview in a couple of sample setups, what that means in reality before we dive into the software.
Okay. So let's start with a few different sample setups of how Vertex can be used. The first one is what Jan just mentioned before, the famous Vertex Suite. This is the all-in-one solution. So for example, you could go ahead, have a computer with 4 outputs, use one output to feed a projector, use one output to feed an LED wall or a multi-display wall. But then you could use the same computer, you just use a third output to, for example, display an operator control surface where an operator can program a timeline. You can then also go ahead and, for example, add a touch screen, which you can also control something with. This is possible, it can be done, but keep in mind, it always comes down to performance. So if you want to put everything on one machine, that's going to have to be a pretty beefy machine. So one of the main setups we see, which we all highly recommend, is more of a split setup where you have a dedicated machine to do editing. And then you could have multiple playout machines, which then only take care, for example, of rendering video to 4 projectors, or even doing one large LED wall in 8K, whatever you want to do. But then you're pretty much splitting things up, which you have, let's say, a rather low power system to do your editing and the high power systems to actually do your video playout. Another setup we see quite often is a main backup scenario, where you have basically one playout machine which is active at the same time, but then you have a backup which can have different functionalities. It can be what we call a partial backup or a redundant backup. The redundant backup is pretty simple. It will always do the same thing all of the time. And the partial backup is really where a machine can take over a certain role when it has to. But that can be done with Vertex as well, that you can build yourself complex, let's say, backup scenarios. And last but not least, the big the big setup, which we see quite often, especially in fixed installs, when it comes down to having a lot of playback machines, which let's take, for example, larger projection mapping setups in museums, which it's just too much time for one person to do them all at the same time. So you have multiple operators working on multiple playout machines, which are then, normally routed over an AV matrix and then spread out to their different destinations. So those are
for this kind of setup, you can also think of the edit machines are only being present during setup. They can be removed later on so that the entire show can then be run on a single master machine.
Absolutely. So with that, I would suggest let's dive into the application and have a look around there.
Sure. Should I? I'll just start with some simple steps. So what we see here first, I'm a little bit confused since I'm seeing the Zoom and the UI at the same time, but I think I'll manage. So what we'll see here, this is the Vertex user interface. If you start an empty project, so on the top left-hand side, there's the so-called Project Explorer. This is the management tab that shows you all the elements that you're creating, that you're interacting with, whether it's content, whether it's your systems, whether it's any devices or selection groups or sequences, and so on and so forth. And there's even a couple of object types that will be revealed once you create them, like variables, scripts, or other things that are not shown by default. So if you create new items, here's the full list of objects that you can create in different types, and these will then be visible here in the Project Explorer. Then in the center, by default, there is the render editor that lets you see what the video part is rendering. You can also switch to a so-called system output setup. So if you want to configure your system, if you want to go to a UI on primary, if you have this kind of setup where you have the UI mixed with the full screen output, you can do this here. And there's also the content transfer monitor. If you're dealing with multiple machines, you can see the transfer status of the individual files being transmitted to your playback machines. Then on the right-hand side, we see the inspector. The inspector is organized in so-called categories. So the main category is always aimed at the most frequently used properties of an element that you've selected. And at the moment, there's system 2 selected. So here, for my systems list, I have 2 currently in my project or in my session, and system 2 is selected. The main shows me the main features. I can go through the video, audio, and general settings and network. And there's always an all category that shows me all of them. But that's not all, really. This is the standard view and the standard mode of the UI. You can always switch it to be an advanced view, and then it will reveal all the power user features, and every function will be available and visible now. So for starters, if you work with the software, you should be fine in standard view. If you look into,
I have a question, Jan. What if I'm looking for a certain property? Let's say I want to.
I was getting to that. So once you're familiar a little bit with the software and you're looking for a certain property, and you're somewhere in this inspector where then you know, okay, I'm on the system, and maybe I just want to turn off what is it? I want to look for auto start or auto start features. I type in auto, and then it filters the inspector live and shows me the auto start settings. So this is a quick way to just find and search for the properties you're looking for on the particular selection that you have. So that, I think that's that's at least a good start for the inspector. There's a couple of more features here, but since this is not a full training, I'll skip a couple of things. And So if you have questions, just feel free to ask. So down here is the playback editor, and the playback editor has currently, by default, loaded a sequence number 1. Since once you start an MD project, there's always there will always be at least one sequence generated so that you can start and program. So, and yeah, to do that, I'd like to bring in some content. Just go on the hard drive. Let's see. It's not my machine, but I think I know where content is. Maybe here, test content. That's a good place to start. So I'll just bring in maybe that clip. I'll just drag it directly on the timeline. So I dragged it twice. So what you see here is the orange bar that is progressing. When I drag in new content, it creates a content object for me, or content asset. And when you see this orange progress bar, it creates automatically a so-called proxy file for me. A proxy file is a low-res file of the clip. So in case you're dealing with really large setup like 8K or larger or multiple 4K displays, your preview laptop might not be capable of displaying and rendering everything. That's why you can always choose this little toggle button here in the render editor, toggle proxy mode, and then it loads the video in its proxy resolution. So if we go a little bit closer, so here I can simply quickly switch between the two resolution modes, low res and high res. And in low res, it of course, consumes much less performance. So, and that's one way of importing content, but you can also choose the file menu to import content, image files or image sequences, or you simply right click on content and choose any of the content here as I just did. So I'll just add some more. And one important thing to notice about Vertex, once we're dealing with content, what we have here on the sequence is a single track at the moment, and I've put a second content on it. And if I move these together and I play them back, it does an auto transition. So this is also on by default, so that it's obviously very long. So I need to zoom in a little bit. So, and this means that Vertex is not layer-based. It's not like some other media servers that have a dedicated amount of layers. Vertex is organized in render elements. And every clip container generates a render element or something to render. And that's why we can act as in Final Cut or any other nonlinear editing system and have multiple contents on the same track, have them run even simultaneously if you want to. Or you simply just create new tracks and do some composition and place things on top or underneath each other. Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
Should I do a little excursion into composition, what things are about? Or?
Yeah, I think I wanted to also cover what can we do with the clip container.
Off you go.
And since the basic features of a content, we can see them here in the main section. So we'll position, rotation, and scale. So these are all 2D features, but in general, Vertex exists or does its composition in a 3D space. So any element here can be positioned in X, Y, and Z. So if you open the positioning property, so you can move things back and forth, you can rotate them across any axis. So this is a full 3D compositing system behind it. But if most of your shows that you might do are in 2D, you can skip that and just work with the top level X, Y, and 2D coordinates systems. Then on top of that, there's every clip container has its own color correction parameters for hue, saturation, brightness, and color balance, same as levels correction and cropping. So these are common features that you would see in normal editing packages or programs like Photoshop. So these are all by default available for every clip container. So these are not extra effects that you need to add, but these are directly available from every clip. Yeah, then another important thing to note is that Vertex plays the audio portion directly or also supports embedded audio up to well, technically up to 228 channels, but we haven't had that yet. So multi-channel support is there, but you can also load individual WAV files or AIFF files. That's also possible in either single channel or multi-channel. And for that, there's a dedicated audio parameters like, or properties like the channel maps that you can define on which output channels your content channels should be mapped to, or yeah, you can control the volume. Or there's a new feature since I think last week, end of last week, there's an equalizer built in that you can use so to do some sound equalization. Yeah, did I miss anything, Martin, or anything important? Maybe there's a ton of details here.
Oh, there's a ton to do, but I would say I'd pick up maybe on the part of the timeline and shortly explain how Vertex takes care of let's say, combining multiple systems into one. So as you can see here, what Jan just showed you, we have a 3-dimensional compositing space in here in which we can move, rotate, navigate, whatever we want to do. And the question is, how do we now define where this content is being played back? Because we're not programming on a system. We are not layer restricted anymore. We are completely free. And if I click this little icon down here, you can see I have a display surface, as we call it, looking at my part of the content here. What is a display surface? When we think of content, we think of the canvas, what we're looking at now, which is the area where the artist works. That's where the painter works. That's where we composite content in the canvas. And then we take a display surface, which you can imagine as a camera, which looks at a part of the canvas, and then we assign that to any output in the network. Sounds a lot more complicated than it is. I'll give you a little demonstration quickly of how that works. I'm just gonna delete something so it's more fun. So what you can see in the lower right-hand corner is the second computer we have connected to Vertex. So we have a second system, as you can see here. If I switch the view, you don't see much of a difference. It's looking at the normal user interface, but now I could go ahead and turn this second computer into a full screen output. So you can see here, I have it as a pip in there. I'll do a click into my canvas and say, create a new display surface. And I want this surface to be on my system number 2 on the first output. I want it to be HD in my canvas. And for the simple, just to keep it simple, it's going to be an HD output, an HD canvas. So it's all going to be 1-to-1. I'll press OK. And now I have a second display surface, which appeared here. Jump into my systems. Here's my system number 2, my razor. Do a right click. And now I'll tell it to enter full screen rendering. And if everything works out, we now have a full screen image on the second computer. And now this is where the display surface comes into play. I can click on my display surface number 2, go to the main category, and for example, take the canvas offset, which I can define which part of the canvas I'm actually looking at, or I could go ahead and give it an additional color correction if needed to maybe adjust the color temperature or do something like that. So this is how it basically works inside of Vertex. You do all of your compositing work completely independently in a canvas, and then assign a display surface to an output in your network to connect, let's say, the content world with your physical output world, which has huge advantages in your daily workflows. For example, you can start to program a show or an installation without knowing which products you'll finally be working with. For example, in the past, I used to work as an operator, and I had issues where I was using version, let's call it version 1 of a product, which was specified, and then for the show deliver got version 2, and it wasn't compatible. So I had to reprogram the show or do a lot of copy pasting, or it was planned to run on one machine, then things got heavy, not enough performance, one had to split it onto 2 machines. All of that then had to lead into reprogramming. This is not the case in Vertex. You program in your canvas, which is independent from your outputs, and then you add the display surfaces to your canvas to feed the pixels to the outputs in your network. So a very independent, very flexible way of working. And that also explains why, for example, on this timeline here, we can simply add as many layers as we need, that we can composite any way we like.
One more thing to add about the surfaces. The surfaces are also the place to go when you want to do soft edge blending or LED mapping. So the blending applies to the surface, since everything that is rendered from the canvas is then being shown on the surface itself. So that's why we have the which one are we looking at here on the bottom right? It's, I think, surface 2, and the edge blend parameters, for example, are come in here. So these have left start and gamma and luminance. So these are the properties that are available. But there's also a hook to Vioso. The Vioso is a company that creates camera calibration for projector blending. And these files and this calibration process is tightly integrated into Vertex. And these files can also be loaded and be used for recalibration. But for manual work, this happens via the edge blending features here. And if you wanted to do some warping, I'll just go into my system view and then system 2 and output 1. And here we go. So here's the surface itself. So, and on that surface, I can go into my library, to my modifiers, add an FFD to it. And well, maybe I did. Did I do it correct? I think so. No, I didn't. That's the team view. There we go. And with team view and the mouse, sometimes it's lost. So here, if I want to start doing some warping, I do it on the surface, and we can also go into the individual points. But that's that's for another more in-depth training. And I'm remoting in here to a team viewer. That's why my mouse is a little bit. Yeah, I think that works. So I guess you get the idea. So there are these FFD modifiers, and the FFD modifiers also work as a stack. So multiple modifiers can be combined on the same surface. So you can have a sub-selection of points that can get a different modifier. And that's where you can really have a really fine-grained control over how you do the warping. And this change would be made here on the selection vertices UV. So you can really determine on which level you work on an object when you do blending and warping or just deformations. And all these parameters can also be animated. This is something that we forgot to mention in the timeline. So if you double click on a clip container, that's where you can access all the parameters. And the same applies to surfaces as well. Surfaces can be dragged and dropped into the timeline as well and can be animated. So if you need to animate your soft edge or your position or your viewpoints or which parts you want to see, this is possible as well.
If you like, I can just show some simple animation because that's something which is used all the time. And there's quite a few nice ways to do this. So for example, I have the little crocodile here. I'll jump to the beginning of my clip container. There's a few shortcuts what to do. I just used Alt and the arrow key to jump to the beginning. Now I'll take my position and I'll move the crocodile over here. And now I can simply do a right click on this property in the inspector and say add keyframe, move forward in time and move it to a second position. And now if I open this up, I've already created a keyframe animation. If I keep on going and pull it back again, I have a second one. I can now, of course, jump into the keyframe editor here. I can click on a keyframe. I can start to edit it in here. I can move it around. That's a bit much. Let's put it down to 50 again, or 500. There we go. I could even go ahead and, for example, do a right click on it and say, I want to edit curves. So I can turn this into Bezier keyframe, which I can then move around to get custom animation. So all of this is done inline in the timeline editor. Very simple, very straightforward.
Another topic we can mention. So what if the content needs to be replaced? So we have this crocodile picture here, and Vertex supports also content versioning. And I'd like to focus a little bit on what we can do with content. So we can, for any content, we can import a new version and replace it anywhere we like. So I don't, on my system, I usually have another crocodile, but let's change it to bees. So and it even has a different aspect ratio. So it will change that file in every clip container where it's used and replaces automatically. And it will add a new version to the content in the content inspector, so under a current version. And if you want to move back because you thought, wasn't the right one, you simply switch back to the original one. So there can be as many content versions as you like. You can also delete them later on. And we also have a couple of projects who do this for end clients that can push a button and get a file dialog that opens up to automatically replace content. So this is also available. Besides content versioning, there's a couple of other content types. So we mentioned the file types. There's Photoshops with Photoshop layers supported. We can load in PowerPoints with the individual slides and give you access also to the text elements and the notes. And there's, of course, also support for live inputs. If you have Blackmagic or Asia or DeltaCast cards, these are mostly and widely supported. And also most direct show devices should work right away. On top of that, there's NDI support, NDI 5, which can be used, and NDI can not only be used as input, also as output. So Vertex supports output streaming so that you can pick a surface and use it as a streaming source to stream this to any other device through the network. Then there's a couple of internal contents that we have here, whether it's generic text, whether it's colors, whether it's test patterns. So you can play with all that, and even video streams or image URLs and HTML content. And HTML content is quite interesting because you can load web pages to be displayed in Vertex, and you can even interact with web pages if you wanted to. So now we're seeing YouTube being rendered partially here. So I don't know what Martin did, but I'll just scroll over here. And it tells me that I need to consent with the with their settings. Just go to interact and say I agree, and then it lets me browse to the YouTube page. And the same could also work in full screen. So the full screen renderer is also fully clickable. There are click scripts, and we should come to the script part soon to explain that. But let me round up the content part. So HTML is interesting, especially also that HTML can be used with transparent backgrounds. So we have a couple of clients who use their own HTML content and feed it into the system and use it as overlay inside of a composition. So this is a quite interesting way of dealing with it. And of course, Vertex supports 3D objects and internal objects such as spheres and or 2D planes or segmented planes. And FBX, 3ds file formats are supported to be loaded in if you need to load in logos or custom objects for UV mapping or projection mapping.
Otherwise,
then, yep.
If you want, I could continue and show an alternative to the timeline, because Vertex, or if you have something else you would do here.
Yeah, the queuing and scripting is something that I thought we could mention, and also the fade to time and fade to queue feature. So, for example, so there's this little icon here which calls add queue or shortcut M that lets us create queues within the timeline. And let me just pick another video here. It's more, go, and I'll just load it here. So the queues can have different functionality, whether they're continuous queues, so they are basically just markers. They can have a pause action, a stop, or wait, or jump to time, jump to queues, so that you can create different jump points. And this can also be scripted, and every queue has also a script code parameter, and scripts can be found in many places in the application. So this is just one very easy way to do it, or to find it, since I could, for example, in a queue, I could trigger another playback. If I have a secondary sequence, I could simply type in playback. In this case, I'll just use the playback I'm on, 1 dot, and then it will automatically show me all the elements or the functions or the properties that I can access. In my case, maybe I'll just want to type in play or go to queue. So, and this is how you can automate the show flow, basically by writing your own very simplified scripts. So this scripting language is the Vertex internal scripting language. It's not a real high-level programming language. For that, there's C# and others, and we'll be adding these in the next couple of months. There will be an update where the scripts will support C#, Python, and Lua for the experts here. But this scripting language is intended to really automate Vertex so that you can create custom show flows and logics inside of Vertex.
I think it's already in the beta as far as I recall.
Yes, correct,
Yeah.
correct.
So
Python,
if you go into
Lua, and C# is in the beta.
If you go into your user account and go on support, anyone can generate a user account on iversal.com, just hit register. You can go into a category called support, my support, downloads, and there you can find the beta version, the current version, and the release version. And in the beta version, you'll already find the scripting.
Okay. I wanted to just round up the queuing and the scripting, and here there's a couple of more functions. So I can use this little drop down if I'm in the middle of the show and I just want to directly go to a different queue. I can jump there with this go to queue, which is like go to the selected queue in that list. But I can also script this to script and go to a specific queue. And before I knock myself out, or create an infinite loop, this could also happen. So I could also tell it to just fade to the next queue. And this will use a predefined preload time and a fade time that can be defined in this sequence setting. And this can also be done live. So if you're in the middle of the show and you need to jump and fade to a different section, you can use the fade to queue or fade to time functionality, and these are also available as scripts. So that would be something that would be available as fade to queue play, fade to time, and you will see if you hover over these commands, there's a little tooltip that gives you other parameters that you can use. Also, if you want to try scripts, there's a command line down here where you can try and enter them. You can do the same thing just for testing out functionalities. And in general, every object, anything, whether it's a surface, whether it's a clip container, the script code allows us to access anything in Vertex, both internally and also remotely. So via TCP or UDP from external devices, Vertex can fully be remote controlled through that API. Yeah, did I forget anything or anything important?
And that's pretty much it, I would say. It's always, Jan and I always have to laugh because once you dive into Vertex, you could pretty much spend 1 hour on each little thing, but we're trying to give you a broad overview. Yeah, but I think that covers the most important things in regards to let's say, call it timeline editing. In that case, I'll do a very, very short block on playlists, because this form of editing is quite useful if you want to do things which are in a linear fashion, or it's the way you're used to working. But there's different ways you can work with Vertex as well. For the fun of it, I'm just going to import some content. What I'm clicking on is called Import Directory, which allows me to import a complete directory at once. So I'm now navigating to my studio training. There I have a bunch of overlays. Now I'll go to my playlists, to my clips. So I want this folder, press OK. And now you can see I have a collection, and here it's importing my clips. So imagine you have a setup where client just gives you a bunch of files and just wants to play them back one after the other and make them loop in some way. As ridiculous as it sounds, that has been quite difficult with many media servers in the past, because the media server was simply just built to do too much. So we've decided to also add a simplification into Vertex. So you can see here, I did a right click on playlist and created a new playlist. And now I can simply go ahead, drag and drop all my files in here and press play. And now you can see I have a playlist running these clips, and you can see I have different functionalities. So if I select all my playlist items here, I can decide, do I want to have a manual trigger? So each time I press play, it will play back the next clip, or I could tell it to follow, so it will automatically go into the next clip. I can define some things if I wanted to crossfade, to do a transition in which time. All of these
and again,
things,
there's scripts.
And their scripts as well. So
I've seen projects that use the playlist only as script list, so with no content, just to have a rundown of certain scenarios and commands. So this can also be used for that.
And that's insanely useful. There's also modes which you can turn a playlist, for example, to do a shuffle, that they take different clips all the time. And there's also, we see a lot of clients using the playlist, for example, if a client has a folder and they just want the content in that folder to play back. Vertex also supports different versions of watch folders of how you can bring content into the application. And one is called Add Update Playlist. So you can pretty much link a folder on your hard drive to a playlist or a sequence, and then it will automatically, for example, populate your playlist and play back the files which are lying in that folder. So a very easy way to automate things.
And we added this since there were a couple of projects that required external or the end client being able to just upload new content to Vertex, but without interfacing with Vertex. So they didn't want to touch the UI, and they only wanted to basically delete the files in a given folder or directory and put in new files in. And once these file changes happen, you can define what kind of script is called and what kind of playlist or sequence is being auto-generated from that list of files. And and this is a very convenient and easy way to give access to non-media server operators or end clients the ability to feed in new content into a given setup.
So I would say once with the end client, why not have a look at the control view? Do you want to dive in? Should I dive in?
As you like. So the control view is a built-in UI designer. It's organized. It can be organized in one or multiple pages, and you can have one or multiple control views. One view is basically one set of pages of controls. So you can think of it like a menu structure or like multiple pages that are called as a group or are working together as one menu. And by default, if you create a new control view, or there's always one control view in, you have also page one already prepared for you, so you can add new controls like buttons, toggle buttons, slider buttons. So there's a variety of sliders, 2D sliders, and these let you control any part of Vertex again. For example, on the click button, there's a script. There's various properties that you can set for the design. So for the styling, so you have control of the button colors and border colors and corner radiuses. So it gives you a lot of control of how the appearance of each control. And these controls can not only control Vertex, so help you as an operator build your own UIs for certain show scenarios. You can even export or expose them as web pages and host them in a web browser. In order to do so, you should run Vertex as administrator. Then Vertex is allowed by Windows to serve web pages. Right now, we simply started Vertex as a normal process and not as admin. That's the only thing to consider.
What else do we have regarding control views? So pretty much you can think of this control view, what we're looking at here, as your editing surface. But for example, you could also have a Vertex license run a control view in full screen. We even have a separate license for that called the Vertex Touch, which you can put on any Windows tablet and then have Vertex run as an application, completely independently. Exactly, there's a few things which you can do. For example, as what Jan is showing you now, you can add whiteboards where, for example, people can put in a signature or a pen. You can add a password protection or a PIN code to certain pages that, for example, staff can access more features than a regular client can. And the control view can also be used to just display value. So it's not only about controlling, it's also about displaying information. So what Jan is probably doing is creating a label, as we see here. And let's say we want to put in a time code. We want to know at which time code a sequence is, and we want to display that for someone. There's a pretty easy way to do that. There's what Jan is doing. He's looking for what we call.
I think I can do it right away. You can type it in.
Off you go. Yeah, type it in.
Time code. I think that's it.
Perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Sometimes you can drag and drop, and sometimes you can simply just type it in.
Yeah, works the same way, but just to give you a basic overview of what can be done. So now you have a real-time feedback, for example, of the time code of the sequence where it's running, which then can be, imagine, even displayed on an iPad for someone who's just watching a web browser. So it's a very interactive way of linking things together. Or what Jan now is doing is controlling. I'll just switch on the session member over here. He's controlling what's called the mix level.
Yeah.
So you can see if he brings the fader down, the opacity, so to speak, of the whole playback is being pulled down. You could do that for volume. You can do that even for a position if you want to manually adjust something to everything. It's a very, very flexible framework. That's the main idea of it. I will do one little dive, if that's okay, regarding
devices.
All of these
we should mention
devices.
Yes.
I'll do something very simple, and then Jan will take you down the rabbit hole. But the simple thing, for example, I could go ahead and add a RGB dimmer, which I can access over different protocols. It could be streaming ACN, it could be ArtNet. But you can see here, I have a device which has color, which will be sent out. But I can now take this device and drop it on the timeline. So I can not only use this timeline for video or images, I can now go ahead, make the device nice and red, add a keyframe, make it blue over there. There we go. And then I have a keyframe animation of an RGB dimmer, for example. And devices go a lot further than just simple things as lighting. And now I'd hand over to Jan.
Sure, no problem. That's more, yeah, that's my realm. So we've added quite a bunch of generic TCP devices to control routers, switches, projectors. There's PJ-Link support. There's all sorts of projector support and Blackmagic device support in here. And I don't know all of them by heart, but my colleague entered all the commands he could find in all the manuals. And you can, this device library is also extensible. So it's text file based, and we can also give you access to write your own libraries if you want to. Or you simply, like one of our clients provided us the E2 data set, and yeah, we sent them how to a template, how to create a device file, and they basically made it for us. It was quite nice from Alviso. And if you want to access a device that is not animatable like a DMX device, in this case, the E2, I just use it down here in the command line, typing in device2 dot, and then it tells me what I can do. So I can recall a preset, I can do an auto transition, and yeah, it will show me the functions or properties that I can set or call on that particular device. And the same applies to projectors or other devices. There's a couple of more special devices like MIDI or OSC or generic TCP clients. So if you want to send raw data to a TCP server, you can also do that. So it goes pretty far. So so you can either use the internal devices or generic devices that are there, or do some raw communication. And there's there's control for, as you can see, for REST APIs. So simply type in what you think you're looking for. I don't know, if I'm looking for OSC, I type in OSC. It gives me a sender and receiver device. Or if I want to do something with the JSON, let's see if there's a JSON. There's a JSON sender as well. So there's a lot of things, and this is also where where Vertex is very modular, and where we constantly add more devices based on project and client requests. Like every week, there's something new that is being added to the framework. Yeah. Any questions so far? So feel free to send us more questions. We've answered a few already in text, but if there's anything, let us know. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, maybe to put devices into context, two of the main applications we see a lot, for example, is in live situations, that the E2 as a switcher for cameras, for example, and Vertex are linked together. So if the E2 operator recalls a certain preset, Vertex does something, for example, switches a background or fades something out. So there's less to think of in a live situation. The other thing we see a lot is that in fixed installations, people use Crestron or AMX, for example, to control Vertex, or even, for example, Jan is using a little Stream Deck to just give a physical button control of something. So yeah, a lot of combinations are possible.
Yeah, when it comes to fixed installs, and again, scripting seems to be my favorite, but it's one integral part of Vertex. I just like to show there's also the ability of using triggers and wiring. Triggers are therefore, if you have a certain value, as we just saw on the slider, if a certain value meets a certain mathematical condition, you can call a script. That's possible. That's how you can create simple logical conditions. there's also a way of wiring properties to one another. So you can create wirings. We had one project in a museum where a TCP device was reading the positional data from an elevator that was a glass, with a glass cabin that you could see through, traveling in front of an LED wall. So it was bringing up and down the elevator. It was giving us the positional data, and we were linking it to a mask that was traveling with it. So their mathematical expression was added from the positional data to the actual pixel position of that clip container that was added here in the target. So this is also possible. And for automating Vertex based on different schedules, you can create your own schedules in here. And in these schedules, you can create events. And once you create an event, again, there's a start and an end script. You can define the recurrence of the event, how often it should take place, and what the daily patterns are. And yeah, this again gives you a quite flexible control of when something should be played back or happening. And we've been dealing with just 2 playbacks right now, but we also have clients who use many sequences and playlists in combination, and or they basically enable or disable them for certain scenarios they want to play with or play them back.
Okay. So if you like, let's see if there are any more questions. So yeah, feel free to knock out any more questions you may have. If you want, we can walk through 1 or 2 projects we have.
There's one is regarding, are we providing any kind of node system or node functionality? The answer is yes, it has been on the roadmap. We've been implementing it last year. Our current beta already has the node system built in. We're now showing the current release or the current version of the release. And node system is coming in, is being added, as well as the new programming languages that are being added. And yeah. And there's a few more features down the road that are already scheduled for this year. Yeah, but the next release is basically what we're looking at right now.
To give you some context regarding the node system, the basic idea behind the node system is to create visual data flow. So you can, for example, what Jan showed you with the wiring, you can do in a visual graphic way. You can bring in an input device, let's say a DMX channel, and then you can link it to anything in Vertex with mathematical functions in between. So it's a visual data flow, as many users, for example, know it from Unreal Engine, so to speak. So that's what's happening there. Okay, we have a question. So if we have 61 full HD projectors and 4 video cards, so how do we do multiple outputs from single machines? With which GPU would that be a good idea to do that?
So 61 full HD outputs of one machine is a tough plan. I wonder if it really depends on the machine, if it could ever handle that many surfaces on the same system. That's one thing, just from a performance point of view. Okay. I haven't, you mentioning the AMD EPIC, we haven't looked at it yet. So far, our test environment is a lot of NVIDIA, but in general, Vertex is not restricted to NVIDIA or not. It's basically on DirectX 11. And it's more question how large your surface gets. There is a restriction in DirectX 11 that it can handle maximum texture size of 16K by 16K. But it doesn't mean that you can create many HD surfaces. Okay, I see. So you were correcting. So that you were looking at the NVIDIA A4000 or A5000. I think running 61 full HD streams out of one machine might be too much. What I've seen so far is up to 12 or 16 outputs of a machine for domes. And yeah, we had
maybe jump in on that.
Yeah,
we
sure.
Go ahead. One client who is using a Threadripper with 32 cores and a RTX 5000 at the time. And they're playing back 16 full HD outputs, which is quite relaxed. But as it goes onto an LED wall and they want to have the highest quality, they're playing it back using Notch LC. And Notch LC is a GPU-based codec, which pretty much gives you uncompressed video quality as an image sequence would offer, but as a video file. And there it keeps, I would say, the GPU goes up to about 65 to 75% load. That's something in the application in the lower right-hand corner. You can always monitor your GPU load or your GPU RAM load. And there you can see quite a spike. So it's in theory possible, but I guess it will be interesting to see how far it can be taken. We have quite a few 8 output setups which use dual GPUs. And I think what's the biggest content we probably have running is 8K or a bit more.
It depends of the aspect ratio. So we have 8K, and we also have larger content that is, I think, 14K wide. But it really depends on the walls. But what it comes down to is if you take the compression ratio of HAP or Notch LC, and both can be dynamic depending on how you encode it. This then purely depends on your content, but I'm probably going too far there. But the thing that I want to mention is at some point your bottleneck is probably the amount of data you can get from your RAID array to the GPU, through the bus to the GPU. That's why I'm thinking of 61 full HD projectors of one system are maybe too much. So that's maybe too big of a task. But this can be easily stretched across multiple machines, and Vertex also supports the synchronization of multiple machines. So if you have a Genlock, an external Genlock on the cards, Vertex can sync also to that clock. That is possible as well. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah. We have a question if RTX series are recommended over the A series from NVIDIA. Currently, we can't say. We haven't been able to get our hands on the large A series yet. The largest card in our test center is an RTX 6000. In theory, there's nothing which speaks against it. We have a few hardware manufacturers which work with us, for example, XE Machines from Hamburg, and they have reported issues using the A series with different media software, not only Vertex, but with different ones, but those are driver related. So currently we cannot give you a thumbs up or thumbs down on the A series, but you can always use the free version of Vertex, the trial version, and install it on any computer and give it a test. The only difference is there's a watermark. Everything else is the same thing. It's the same render engine. Everything is the same.
Even the trial can be used in network and session mode. So it's also meant for test driving and benchmarking Vertex on your system. So feel free to use the trial for anything. And your question was if 16 full HD outputs per machine is a good general limit. Again, it depends. You might do more, but it really depends on your hardware. Vertex doesn't impose any limits on that.
Also, from the sales point of view, 16 has pretty much been the area where it tends to tip, that the single machine cost goes up a lot higher than having a second machine with a second license would cost you. That's true. That's we've had a lot of people then splitting onto 2 machines because the software is affordable enough to be able to spread it out onto multiple machines. Okay. So, but that's the beauty of being hardware independent. It keeps our support busy to test a lot of Q cards, input cards, outputs, whatever. But on the other hand, it also gives you a large flexibility to work with whichever software you would like to work with, whichever hardware you would like to work with.
Should we show a few?
I would say let's jump in and just if anyone feels bored. Feel free. Let's hope not. So here we go. The first project is quite a massive one. I'll hand that one over to Jan.
That was realized in Germany. That's installed by Tennagels, and they did a refurbishment of that of an existing system, and they had to map 26 projectors onto the inside of a huge old gas tank. They're also covering with, I think, 3 or 4 projectors to the top cap of that cylindrical venue. And there's a huge cube in the center of downstairs, which you can only see the edge here on that image. And the control view is used at the ticket office to display the next show times. And yeah, it's also been available or made available through their webpage. Yeah, so they quite use Vertex for, also they pushed the 8K playback on that project a lot. So we optimized a lot in the speed there and the read speeds. And they're using pretty the wide spectrum of the Vertex features here. So warping, blending, and yeah, multiple outputs. They're running, I think they're running up to 8 outputs per system, but that's older 4,000 cards, I think.
P4, that's the P4000s, yeah, not even the RTX.
Yeah, that's older machines. Yeah, that's another interesting project that uses high and low res LED on an industrial side. Also provided by the same client, Ten Nagels, who brought us on board. And here the specialty was that the inside of that factory tour, where they have a huge LED wall, I think that's shown on the next slide, all these widgets, all these little dashboard kind of informations are coming through different web servers and different web pages, and they are being dynamically being displayed. And a tour guide is walking around with an iPad and revealing and calling in different languages, different slides and different parts of that dashboard. And this can be interactively programmed on and replaced by the end client's marketing department.
Yeah, the next one is one of the most classical applications in the past 2 years. These are the NEP studios in Zurich, which they pretty much built in, I think, 3 studios by now altogether with a bunch of LED walls. Yeah, a very, very simple streaming setup, which Vertex is used to play out the backgrounds. But what is interesting here, that this is a highly complex NDI infrastructure. There are up to 40 NDI streams being pushed around that network at the same time. And they use NDI as a backbone for the whole application, which Vertex is seamlessly integrated into their NDI workflow to either provide images which are sent somewhere, for example, as a full screen overlay, or receive images over NDI from multiple sources altogether. Some ice hockey. This is a project which you can find in detail in, oh no, we haven't done the webinar yet, which we will do a webinar on, which uses control views quite heavily, which allows fans of this team to actually run all of the LED playback in the arena, because during the game, in different game situations, they have different advertisements which have to be played back. And instead of having technicians who have to understand the game, they have fans who understand the game and simply press simple buttons, and the technicians prepare everything beforehand, and it's just playback over a control view, which is similar to an immersive restaurant concept in Zurich, Switzerland, which the walls are projected 360 degrees throughout the day and have different contents running at different times with different scenes. So also controlled by the end client over a AMX tablet at the wall. They never see Vertex, but it plays back everything which happens in the restaurant. And yeah, I think to round up, Jan has probably a few words for a very large immersive space.
Yeah, in Montreal, the Oasis Immersive, that's an interactive museum that has changing exhibitions with different artists and even different events that they use it for. And this is one of our largest installs, I think. They have 3 galleries with, I don't know how many projectors, but it's
120 altogether, as I recall. Yeah.
A lot. And for them, we also improved the content peer-to-peer distribution to be really fast, to push that content when they do updates very fast to all the systems. And it's doing a lot of warping and blending and show control. That's what they use it on a daily basis. And
and a huge amount of content, which also led to a few features in Vertex, for example, to tidy up content, that you can remove content in the network to get them rid from systems. Yeah, a lot was done there. If you look for some more information on the projects we just talked about, I've added the link to our showcases, which you can find on our website. feel free to browse. There's a little video to each, as well as some information of what's happening there. So feel free to browse. And yeah, as always, if you have any specific questions, be it technical or be it on sales regarded, reach out to us at sales@iUniversal or Jan on my personal email address. So Jan@iUniversal, Martin@iUniversal. Feel free to reach out anytime and we'll be happy to look in. I would mention one last thing. If you're in Vertex and you are moving around and getting to know the software and you're stuck for some reason, or something isn't working, or you're just simply not getting what you would like to have, we have a fully integrated support system. So if you go to help, you can either go to the online manual, which we of course always recommend to do, but if you're completely stuck, go to send ticket, type in your email address, tell us what the problem is, and write us a short message, press send. And then our support team will receive the ticket with log files from your computer and be able to assist you as fast as we possibly can. So if you have any issues whatsoever with the software, go to help, send ticket, and type in what your issue may be, and our support will gladly take care of it. So I guess you see, we could spend another 2 hours doing this. So we'll promise we'll keep.
And we haven't covered everything, so there's still
not even close.
a lot that we've left behind the scenes. Yeah. But we're doing these webinars regularly, like every month, in both German and English, for integrators and users and operators. That's why we have both the solution talks and the insights. Watch our webpage. We'll update the dates, like I think at the end of the month for the next month. And we'll be happy to see you again, and also to see you again soon in person on one of the trade shows. But we will see once we can get back to that business.
How it evolves. But thank you very much for taking the time, and it was a pleasure. Hope to catch up again soon.
Okay.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.